Miramadawing Wulab Gring. This is Brian. Can I help you?
First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to come on to WAT Now, Brian Beveridge.
Thank you, Shankar.
Who are you exactly, Brian Beveridge?
Dias que vão e só vão, e eu sei também só tenho que passar. Há dias que vêm, só vêm, e dias que vão e...
My employment is at the Language Centre, so I spend my working life here. Do you want to know what I do here?
Let me ask you a question a different way. What keeps you busy in your life?
In my work, I like to get a sense that I am achieving some good for the people or the place that I'm working at. So in particular, in my work, I like to, it's been almost exclusively in non-profits. The time here has been a continuation of that theme, and I have worked in 3 different jobs here, all of which have been about employment or personal development for people. In this case, in the Language Centre, it's with the Mirrawong people in terms of trying to assist them in their ambition to keep the culture and language alive and strong, so just helping out with that. Yep.
How has that experience shaped you or touched you?
It's been a very positive experience because it has enabled me to learn an enormous amount about the Mirrawong people, Mirrawong culture and way of life, and my prime response is to note how generous the Mirrawong people are with their time and with their openness and welcoming of people to come along and have these, that need to get to know them, which really needs this sort of setting for it to happen. You can't just sort of walk in on somebody and say, oh, tell me all about your life. But if there is the sort of setting that can help to enable those connections, then they can work really well.
What sort of environment creates a safe and comfortable environment for people to preserve?
The ingredient for this place is that it's driven by the Mirrawong people. It's their place, it's their institution, and they support it because it is about their culture. And while a lot of the funding that comes in comes from government and might come with all sorts of strings attached, ultimately it's got to conform with that basic principle that it's about what the Mirrawong people want and what they are trying to achieve.
Há dias que vêm, só vêm, e dias que vão e só vão, e eu sei também só tenho que passar. Há dias que vêm, só vêm, e dias que vão e só vão.
You came to the East Kimberley, and one of the things that you said was that you're passionate about environment and getting amongst the nature of the place. But another thing that you were interested in, obviously, is learning about and immersing yourself in the Indigenous culture and learning a little bit about Indigenous culture.
Yep.
Do you think that you've been able to achieve the latter?
Yes, I have a much better understanding of the nature of Indigenous Australia, yeah.
How has that come to you?
By living here in the first place, which means you actually, for a start, you just see a lot more Indigenous people. If you're living in Melbourne or Sydney, you hardly ever actually see an Indigenous person, and if you see a person with a dark skin, it's just as likely to be an African or Sri Lankan person. So there was that aspect. The second aspect is certainly by being able to work with Indigenous people and actually getting to talk to them and to come to slightly, understand their lives by living next to Indigenous people, and certainly through the work at the Language and Culture Centre, really starting to get a little bit more of a little bit more of a sense of what it means, or what life is actually like for an Indigenous person.
When you apply for a job in an Indigenous community, whether it's a public servant, or there's often that question or that part of that selection criteria that says you need to have an ability or experience with cross-cultural communication, working with Indigenous people, etc. How do you understand that notion of need to have cross-cultural experience?
That thing of respect for individuals, respect for country and the people who come from country representing that country. It's understanding that imposing top-down solutions on Indigenous communities will never bring it'll never bring supported solutions. The community won't buy it. They're very obliging people, so they'll go along with it. They'll go along with stuff. Particularly, you know, if it's a government authority and there's money attached to it, they go, all right, well, this is what we've got to do, we've got to do. But you're never going to really buy in and sign on in any significant sort of way.
17 years working for an organisation that was about educating and training people and getting them jobs.
Yep.
And you had a huge amount of satisfaction that you obviously held you to that role where you saw that linear process. Someone comes in jobless, you train them, educate them, they get employed.
Yep.
Has it been frustrating for you to be in an environment where such a linear process has not existed?
There are the same linear processes. There are many Indigenous people who do go through and follow very successful careers in Kununurra as well as anywhere else. The proportion of them, however, is lower. And that completely relates to the issues that they face in their personal lives and their upbringing, you know, the sort of education level, the fact that you and I grew up right from the get-go reading books, living in a household where education is valued, and all of those things are hugely important and affect the long-term success of an individual. And for a lot of Indigenous people in Kununurra, that doesn't exist, and therefore that limits their ability to take up those sort of opportunities. But as I said, there are a lot of them that do.
When you come back, you know, if you ever come back to Kununurra in, say, 10 years, what changes would you have liked to have seen happened?
I would love to see more Indigenous people living more stable lives, because